Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to another table talk. As you can probably imagine, and by the title, today's topic will be about my RC Powers, modified RC Powers T50 version 5. I've been having just a heck of a good time flying this plane now, and I have accumulated 43 flights over 3 different flight sessions. So been pretty much flying the wings off it here, getting it really dialed in. So if you follow along on my blog, I did a very detailed 6-part build log on the whole process that I went through on building the planes, you know, coming up with all the measurements and everything for the modifications. So I'm not going to go into detail in that with that, and I've also done 2 previous videos discussing this plane and some of the mistakes that I made, which I'll talk a little bit more about in this video. And also I have essentially 3 post-flight write-ups on my blog. So I'm just going to put a link to the blog and maybe some other information down below, but I probably won't write a full supporting blog post for this video. So I just want to, before I get into talking about it, my whole purpose is with all of what I wrote up on the blog and all the detail that I went into and the detail that I went into of my dialing in process and all my post-flight reports, was certainly not to convince you to build this plane or build it the way that I build it or fly it the way that I would want to fly it or set it up the way that I would want to set it up, but mostly to just kind of give you a bit of a window on my thought process when I'm looking at building a plane that's unfamiliar to me, with some things that I know work really well on these prop and slot type park jets, and also to satisfy my own the way that I like to fly, the way that I like my planes to look. So again, I'm not trying to force my way of doing things down anybody's throat, but hopefully, by reading through all of that, and there's quite a bit to read through, and by watching this video, perhaps it'll give you some ideas of things that you might want to experiment with in your next build, and it certainly doesn't have to be this plane. But for me, that's always been the beauty of scratch building these foam park jets is there's so much. The only thing that limits your ability to experiment really is your imagination, and because it's foam, it's it's very easy to experiment and play around with, and if it doesn't work out, well then you can always build another one, having learned lessons from a build that didn't work out the way that you wanted it to. Okay, so all those political announcements out of the way. So just quick and dirty, I'm just going to summarize the modifications that I made. I've got my little laundry list here of notes. So essentially I reduced it by 95% because I wanted to have a 27-inch wingspan. So I'll just go over for the stock build. It would be, if I built it at 100%, it should be 28¼ inches, 718 millimeters wingspan, 38¼ inches long, or 972 millimeters. So by reducing it, and I did add these booms on the back here, which probably added a little bit to my length, but after reducing it by 95% and making the mods that I made, I ended up with a 27-inch wingspan, or about 686 millimeters, and my plane from the tip of the nose to the tip of the booms back there, 37½ inches, 952.5 millimeters. So if you've seen any of the other videos, I ended up my all-up weight with the build techniques that I used with a 2200 3S battery, essentially one of these. I ended up at 19½ ounces of weight, 552 grams. So pretty decent. Overall build materials, I used my what is my new build technique now going forward for choice of materials. I'll actually put a link. I did a YouTube video several weeks ago now, kind of discussing what my new build philosophy is and how my build philosophy has changed. So you can go and read or watch that if you want more information. Essentially, the bulk of the plane is built with Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready boards, so fuselage, wing plate, the vertical stabilizers. I used Depron for the nacelles and the rudders down below here because I wanted that extra bit of strength and durability over paperless Dollar Tree foam. And I also built the elevons out of Depron. So that's essentially what I used for the foam. So I left the paper on the Dollar Tree foam behind the KF, the trailing edge of the KF, like I have in other builds. For reinforcement, just quick and dirty, I've got some 3mm carbon tube here, 4mm carbon rod here, and some more 3mm carbon tube ahead of the wing plate. So thus far, you know, I've really been putting this thing through its paces, and that reinforcement really seems to work out. I haven't seen, you know, as hard as I can yanking and banking around, I haven't seen any flex in the wing yet, so I'm pleased with that. So I downsized it, covered the build materials. Other modifications, I changed somewhat the size and the shape of the KF airfoils. I extended them forward. You know, the real T50 has actually maneuvering control surfaces here. I've heard people call them LevCons, leading edge vector control, vector controls or something like that. I've never put those on a T50, and it's not really anything I wanted to mess around with. So I extended my KF all the way forward on the top here, using KF4, which I'll talk about some lessons learned later on. So again, I put very specific measurements in the build log. Because I was building with the Dollar Tree foam and leaving the paper on the back here, I knew it was going to be a little bit tail heavy, so I moved the motor, the actual motor mount forward by 1 inch, and then I also trimmed the leading edge of the prop slot down. I actually ended up, after I built it, I obviously didn't measure it correctly. I moved the prop slot forward, the leading edge of the prop slot forward, I think now by a total of 1/2 an inch. I think originally in the build log I said 3/8 of an inch, but once I mounted the motor, I realized that the prop was still too close to the foam, so I went out back and trimmed about another 1/8 of an inch of foam off the leading edge of that. I didn't really, all I did essentially here with the trailing edge of the prop slot was I just put it straight across. Normally it would have gone, you know, kind of like in a bit of an angled thing, so I just put it straight across. So, you know, it looks pretty big. It may not be that aesthetically pleasing to most people, but I just like to give my prop, you know, as much room as possible to breathe. On the bottom here, the nacelles, I actually shortened them by about 7mm, I think. So they would have been, if I left it stock, they would have been deeper this way. So as a result, in order to keep everything you know, sort of scale, I also trimmed the rudders down. I probably reduced the total surface area of the rudders by, I would say, close to 25%, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So, but I think, you know, again, obviously I'm biased because I made these modifications, but I think, you know, looking at it side on compared to pictures, I think to me it looks a lot more scale, and I think it also helped a little bit with the performance of the plane, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. I increased the size of the ailerons quite a bit. I'm not sure if I would know a percentage number, but probably over 25%. I lengthened them in span and in chord. Again, you can read more on the dimensions there. I also changed the vertical stabilizers. These are probably still a bit too big to be scale, but I changed them to look more, the stock ones were more similar to the ones on the F-22. They had the angle on the front and the back were essentially the same. So I made these to look more like T50 style vertical stabilizers. I would say I probably made them 15%, maybe 20% smaller than what the stock ones would be. But which was one of my goals, and then also you know, I wanted to have that more T50 look. Then the last kind of last thing, getting to the back end here, I changed the shape obviously of these motor nozzles, engine nozzles here at the back, and then I added in this this more scale looking boom, and I think it actually looks pretty cool. You know, when I pull up in the vertical or I see it in the plan form, it looks pretty darn scale. Now I don't know if it adds anything to the Elevon performance, but it you know, whenever given the choice, I'll always go for the cool factor. So anyway, yeah, so that's quick and dirty, just the modifications that I did. Okay, so if you've watched my first video, lessons that I learned, I didn't pay as close of attention because when I modify these the KFs, you know, I used the excuse me. I used the KFs from the plan as a bit of a guideline and then sort of reshaped them in the percentage of wing chord that I wanted. And then sort of once I got one that was the right size, I ended up using that as a bit of a template to draw the second, you know, trace out the second one and then the two bottom KFs. And what I found I did wrong was on the bottom, on this KF here on the bottom, I had not double checked that the trailing edges, it's very important to ensure as close as possible that the trailing edges of your top and bottom KF are equal, because if not, what happens is you get unequal, you know, as the air flows over here, essentially, you know, quick and dirty on a KF, the air flows over and it essentially creates like an air bubble back here, which helps with stability. So if this one was further, this one was back, probably the trailing edge on this bottom one was about 2 millimeters further back. So what ended up happening was, I'm sure, you know, to a certain extent, the bubble top and bottom of the wing were not even. So what was happening, I discussed this a little bit already, but what was happening is I noticed that my plane, you know, I'd be coming down out of a split S, and as it started to accelerate, is it, because of that uneven KF, is it would start to do, like the left wingtip would want to dive that way, and it would pull and yaw as well. So, you know, I checked everything else first, control surfaces, motor, you know, made sure my motor was good and true and all that sort of stuff. And then it, you know, I thought in my mind, okay, well, I didn't really closely check the KFs. And in one of my write-ups, my first initial post-flight write-up, I show how I do that. But essentially, I found this, like I said, this was 2 millimeters too long. So as soon as I trimmed that off, pardon me, that got rid of that problem with the flight envelope right away. One of the things that I found as I started flying this plane is it's a very high performance plane. You know, not to make it sound like the other planes that I fly are, you know, are complete plotters, because they're not. But this one just sort of takes it to a bit higher level. So I found it took, you know, to really get the CG dialed in and really get my throws and trims dialed in. It took a little bit longer than with some of the other airplanes, but you know, I think that makes sense. I mean, you know, if you have a Ferrari and you want it to perform at the top level, you know, it's going to take a little bit more fine tuning and tweaking maybe than your grandmother's Oldsmobile. But you know, that's you know, that's to be expected, I guess. The more high performance plane, and you know, it's, as you get out there on the edge, it takes a little bit more fine tuning to make sure the plane is flyable. And also for me, because this is an airframe, I've only ever flown, I've flown a couple of versions of the RC Powers T50 version 1, as well as the NAMC MiG FA, which is like a concept stealth plane based, the wing plan and everything is based on the T50. So I don't have a whole lot of flights on this type of airframe, and there are some things that, as you can read in my post-flight reports, that can really jump out and bite you. So yeah. So anyway, that was a bit of a fail on my part. Luckily, the RC gods were with me that day, and I was able to find that problem before I, you know, I veered off and hit a tree or the ground or something like that. So again, lesson learned there. Something to be careful of, especially if you're you know, fashioning or drawing out your own KFs. Make sure that after you get them on the plane, is just double check that the trailing edges are equal. So I already talked about the bit of the failure here on the leading edge of the prop slot. I had to trim that a bit more, so I'll be more cognizant of that to do more dry fitting with the motor, so that I can cut that maybe while it's still a flat plate. With this Dollar Tree foam, fortunately, I like to have a tapered edge on the leading edge of the prop slot and the trailing edge. So fortunately with this Dollar Tree foam, because it's fairly soft, after I cut it off, I just kind of went along and pinched it down with my fingers, so I still have a bit of a tapered edge. Another problem that I found after I got it built was initially, as you can see in one of the build posts, because I moved the motor forward by about an inch, I had to trim these, move the trailing edge of these nacelles forward, and then after I mounted the motor, I found out that I still had way too much foam out to here. So it used to come back to here, and I think that's like 1.25 inches. So I had to trim quite a bit more foam off of here so that the prop would have clearance. Especially with these shorter quad racing motors, that's just something to be cognizant of. So I'm glad that I checked that before I fired up the motor the first time and chewed my nacelles to pieces. Okay, the other thing, and I don't really know that it matters too much, because I didn't, I essentially, I should have mentioned at the start, I essentially built this plane because RC Powers mentions that it's this one's faster essentially than the F-22. The F-22 and this plane were released at the same time, and I've already said multiple times that the F-22 version 5 thus far has been my favorite variant of the version 5s from RC Powers. So I knew that this was going to be a faster plane, and probably because of where the battery is located in relation to the wing plate, that it wasn't going to be quite as stable at slow speed. So I'm not terribly concerned, but trimming these rudders down, like I said, I probably trimmed the surface area down about 25% over stock. So when I'm just flying around and I need to feed in a little, feather in a little bit of rudder in a turn or whatever, they're just fine, even though they're pretty small. And now that I've dialed in the plane, and I've also dialed in myself, lots of times I like to go up, go up, pull the plane essentially up like this till it's almost at a stall, and then kick the rudders over, do kind of like a stall turn. And now that I've got myself more dialed in, it'll actually do pretty decent stall turns. However, the last flight out, I was experimenting with some slow flight, trying to see how slow I could fly it without it going all discombobulated on me. And the rudders in slow flight really didn't seem to have a lot of authority. Like, it took a really long time using rudders only to try and get the plane to turn 180 degrees. So if you want to experiment more with slow flying, then that's certainly, don't cut the rudders down any more than what they are. But for what I want them for, to have a little bit of extra yaw authority when I'm turning, especially if maybe there's a little bit of wind, I'm very happy with how those are working out. The vertical stabilizers, even though I reduced the size quite a bit, I'm quite pleased with the roll stability. I was a little bit concerned by cutting them down that when I launched it, it was going to have really bad torque roll problems or anything like that, and I haven't seen any problem with that. So I don't know. Maybe I could cut them down a little bit more, but I probably wouldn't. I'm happy with how the setup is now. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier, by trimming the nacelles down, reducing them by about 7 millimeters in height, is I think that's it's contributed to the plane being fast. It's right now, of all the planes I have in my hangar, it's definitely the fastest of all of them. So it contributed, reduced the frontal profile and the drag, and then what it also did, I think, was it improved the pitch response and also the roll response, because I've got less drag down below, on the plane. So when it rolls and pitches, it has much less much less drag down below. So I'm pretty happy with how that worked out. Yeah, the elevons, I think, you know, I don't know if I reduced or actually increased the size. I cut out quite a bit in here to sort of shape this nozzle, and I don't know that I added that amount that I cut out into these booms. But this plane, the way that I have it here now, and you know, maybe partly because I did move the motor forward by about an inch, so it's closer to the CG. It has a very, very tight moment of inertia, if you want. Like it's only about from the front, where the front of my battery is, to the back of the motor here is only about 8.5 inches. So in my last write-up, flight write-up, I share a lot more numbers and math. But this plane is, like, it has probably some of the lowest throws of all the planes that I fly right now. I think I only have about 3/4 of an inch of travel one way in the pitch in the elevons, and about 3/8 to 1/2 an inch each in the roll for the ailerons and elevons. So it really is super responsive that way in the pitch and the roll. Plus, it's because it's going fairly fast as well. You know, it doesn't need as much control surface deflection. I mean, even flying around at, you know, half throttle, 60% throttle, it zips along really, really well. So anyway, yeah, you know, as I mentioned in my in the other video where I talk about my build, you know, this is the Emax 2306 2750 kV quad racing motor. I'm running a 6x4 APC gas prop on it. So it's got pretty ridiculous, you know, it's not exactly scale thrust to weight ratio. I think in bench testing, that motor cranks out actually about 38 ounces of thrust or something like that, and my plane weighs 19 ounces. So probably even flying around at like 60% throttle, I've got a 1-to-1, probably very close to a 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio. So the plane holds its energy super well. Like I can fly around, you know, just pin the throttle at like 60%. I can do nice, you know, nice smooth loops, rolls, good tight, you know, figure-8 turns, and just fly around. I really don't have to touch the throttle too much. But as I've talked about in some of my write-ups, it's not a plane that you know, that I want to purposely fly around real slow, because it can get a little cantankerous, and it starts to sort of act like a bit of a toddler throwing a temper tantrum, I guess, if you want. But other than that, you know, super impressed. You know, obviously I did make some modifications to it, but super impressed with it. My next step up is I'm waiting for another one of these motors from Hobby King. So I'm going to throw this the other motor that I'm waiting for. I'm going to throw that into the F-22, and then you know, take this and the F-22 out to the field and you know, and have a fly off, because they were both released at the same time, and I guess kind of in real world this is the Russian answer to the F-22 Raptor. So yeah, be fun to just take them out to the field and see what's what. I have a bit of a feeling. I'm trying, you know, and I'm not going to be judge ruin my decision. I have a bit of a feeling that this one's going to be overall faster, but I think the F-22 will probably win out in some other categories. So there we go, folks. Like I said, there'll be lots of links down below. Let me just say this. I will kind of fit this in sort of, if you're fairly new in the hobby, you know, I mean, I know this is a cool looking plane and everything like that, so where would this kind of fit in? I would say this, depending on how your skills progress, I wouldn't, you know, I might build, like, I think right now RC Powers recommends their SU-35 version 5 as their trainer. I've written a series of blog articles on what I think is a good way to get started in park jets. I think MiG-29 version 1 is probably the best way to go, plus the plans are free, easy to build, easy to fix. But I would probably build a couple of other score and fold planes. If you wanted to build a stealth plane, you know, to have in your hangar because you like the cool looks and all that sort of stuff, I would probably build the F-22 version 5 first. It is still fast, very agile and maneuverable, but I think even if you don't modify it like I did to mine, it's going to be a bit more stable and forgiving than what this plane is. You know, it took me, like I said, it took me a little bit longer to get the plane dialed in and to get myself dialed in to you know, to know, be able to anticipate how the plane was going to behave. But it's a plane that, you know, when you're at 50% throttle or higher, it's just happy as a pig in mud. So, but anyway, just my thoughts on it. So yeah, check out the comments down below. Lots of info there on my blog on how I got to where I am. I'm really enjoying this. Like I said, it's right now the fastest airplane in my hangar with this setup, and really a lot of fun to fly. So thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.